Yo, welcome back to the channel. I'm Jimmy. We're here to do another reaction. I know in my previous reaction my voice was doubled. I realized what I was doing wrong. Hopefully I fixed it on this one. But I found a video here from Dr. Abs. Oh, before we get too far into it, we're up to 30 subscribers. So if we can get up to 50, that'd be great. Like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. Thank you so much for tuning into the content. But I found a video from a guy named Dr. Abs. If he really is a doctor, he's killing me in terms of education. But fun fact, I do have a bachelor's in biology with a medical emphasis. So I don't get to use that skill much, but watching this video, I've seen some things that were misleading. So I've seen this before, and I'm just going to play it through. As you can see, I'm starting it from about the 3-minute mark. Up until this point, he just pretty much explained fructose's metabolism and how it behaves and all that jazz. So we're going to watch. I'm going to stop it, make comments.
So what then? What is it about all these 3 steps that are such an issue? Well, you have to understand that phosphate is crucial. It's key. And we get that phosphate from a very particular place. So that phosphate comes from ATP. I'm sure many of you have heard of this. If you haven't, ATP, adenosine triphosphate, it's like...
So for a little background, he was mentioning how fructose comes to ATP and it breaks a phosphate off. So that's why he started with that phosphate is crucial. So just a little background, but we're not going to watch the whole explanation of the metabolism. He uses every 5-syllable word you can think of. We're just going to watch it from here.
Like the currency that we have in our pocket, and we spend it when we want a I've heard of this. If you have an ATP, adenosine triphosphate, it's like the currency that we have in our pocket, and we spend it when we want a process to occur within the cell. So we take ATP and we essentially break it down. We take one of the phosphates off it. So now instead of adenosine triphosphate, it's adenosine diphosphate, ATP to ADP. We break that phosphate off, and now we have to use it for this fructose over here, for fructolysis, which means the ATP concentration dips in hepatocytes. That's never a good thing. Just think about that. That's the currency which allows the cell to do its job, to function properly. But because you've put an amount of fructose in there which is greater than 0, you're now immediately dipping the ATP concentrations.
I feel like what he just said was misleading. It's not false, but ATP being converted to ADP is what energy is. It takes energy. It takes ATP to make that process, but breaking that phosphate off, that actual breaking of it releases energy. So it turns into adenosine diphosphate, true, but it's rephosphorylized. Like another phosphate is applied to that same ADP and it becomes ATP again. It's recycled.
And so that alone, that's a massive alarm bell, right? And the thing is, this first step, especially fructose to fructose 1 phosphate, step 1, that's unregulated. Okay, now if you don't know what that means, it means there's no kind of break. Like if there's more fructose coming in, more ATP is broken down to deal with it. Like there's no limit.
Through Rula, it's easier to connect with a therapist who specializes in you. Tell us what's important and
Ask yourself why that is. Why have we evolved over millions of years to have that step unregulated?
We evolved over millions of years to have that step unregulated because liver glycogen is very important. Fructose is the main and most efficient way to store glycogen in your liver. Most fructose is actually metabolized in the liver because it's the only one that has the fructokinase, the enzyme that breaks down the fructose and gets the party started. So it's not regulated because we might need it in an emergency. And for athletes that need quick energy, it works for them too. So the liver stores anywhere between I think 100 and 120 grams of, uh, it might not be grams, but 100, I think it's grams of glycogen. And that's what your body uses when you fast. That's what your body uses to feed your brain when you are asleep, when you're not eating. And that liver glycogen is very important. Now, if there's a bunch of fructose coming in, you do get metabolic syndrome because those ADPs aren't turned into ATP fast enough, and you're depleted of ATP as it comes to your liver. So that's why you would want to do it, because you're storing glycogen in your liver, and that's very important. And the fructose is not used for glycogen. Eventually, it is turned into fat. But if you're not having any dietary fat, it's just going to be burned as energy with everything else. And that's another thing that I don't think people are taking into account when it comes to this diet. They keep saying donuts and M&Ms, and they just keep ignoring the low-fat part. They keep saying it's the standard American diet, ignoring the low-fat part. This is fructose in the absence of fat, which he doesn't speak on. But even fructose with some fat is healthy for you in certain doses. Like, you don't want to. I think high fructose corn syrup would be a problem over time, but if your energy balance is good and you were drinking soda, you would be thin. If you were getting the right amount of calories in, you would be thin.
Well, I believe, and this is an opinion now, not a fact, but I believe that we have evolved for that to be unregulated because it allows the body to minimize the damage from the fructose. Now, it actually does minimize damage because once it's phosphorylated, which is the process, it's now not the same molecule anymore. And its ability to glycate, which is why it's so toxic and damaging, in fact, it's multiple times more glycating than glucose, is now diminished as a result. So we're basically tagging it with phosphate to stop it doing what it wants to do. Imagine someone's in a restaurant and they're shouting and shouting and shouting and they're disturbing everyone and everyone hates it. Then someone comes along and tags them with a piece of duct tape over their mouth so they can't shout anymore. That's essentially what's happened here. The hepatocytes are trying to quieten down this molecule because everyone else is trying to eat their meal. Sorry if the analogy is a bit patronizing, but hopefully it makes sense. And so because it's unregulated, it just keeps on using up ATP, keeps on using it up. And the third step, which is where we're taking the glyceraldehyde to glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate, again, it uses up ATP. So two of the three steps.
It doesn't only use up ATP, and glucose actually uses ATP too in its metabolism to give you more ATP on a yield. So it doesn't just use up ATP. That breaking of the ATP, instead of it being energy to the body like it would for glucose, it's only energy to feed that process for fructose. So it kind of creates its own energy in that sense. But again, just a bad reading of what's going on.
Are carried out to absolutely, in an unregulated way, break down the ATP and reduce the ATP concentration in the cell, which is what we need for the cell to work. Not for any particular function within the cell, for all functions in the cell, we need that ATP for things to work. Once we have that glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate, that then enters.
Now, I can say that's patently false. We don't need ATP for things to work. That's not the way it goes. We need the energy provided from ATP. So what we need for things to work is ATP to go to ADP because we're breaking off that phosphorus group and we're getting that energy. So that's just plain untrue.
The glycolysis process, and it's used in that way. But just think about what you're doing. You are literally taking away from the cell the thing it needs to work. How can a diet that causes this to happen much more frequently?
It's so hard for me not to pause him on that because his currency analogy is actually spot on. Money on my debit card means nothing until I go to swipe it. and pass that energy to buy whatever I want to buy. Usually, in my opinion, at more value than the money was to me. So I'm spending energy to get more energy on the other end, or some kind of good or service. But it's not a direct correlation, of course. But yeah, no, absolutely not.
Be healthy in any perspective whatsoever. You might say, well, more frequently, be healthy in any perspective whatsoever.
It can't be healthy in any perspective whatsoever, of course, except, of course, like storing liver glycogen. So I'm going to cut this dude off here, and we're going to visit our friend ChatGPT.
You might say, well, short term, so I know.
We're going to visit our friend ChatGPT. Sorry, I'm new to this. So, benefits to fructose. I can't type. Rapid liver glycogen replenishment. Rapid liver glycogen replenishment. Fructose is primarily metabolized in the liver, where it efficiently replenishes liver glycogen. Important for stable blood sugar, mental clarity, and endurance during fasting or between meals. Is what we feed on between meals. That's why you will want to do it. That's why it's healthy. Faster ATP turnover, quick energy. Being that fructose is not regulated, that glycolysis step is really fast. Glycolysis is not bad. It's the rapid breakdown of ATP and the resynthesis. So it has a thermogenic effect. It's sweeter than glucose by like 1.8 factor. It enhances rehydration and preserves muscle glycogen as well. Another thing he's not mentioning enough for me is that most of this takes place in the liver. So he keeps saying the cell like it's going to be your whole body, but fructose is almost immediately sent to your liver for the most part. So definitely benefits, but while we're at it, does fructose behave differently on a low-fat diet? Yes, fructose behaves very differently depending on the fat intake, especially dietary fat. On a high-fat diet, fructose is more likely to be converted to fat via de novo lipogenesis. Genesis just means creation of. Lipo is the word for fat. In the liver gets overloaded more easily, increasing triglycerides, fatty liver risk, and insulin resistance. Mitochondria are less efficient at burning off the byproducts when fructose is high. On a low-fat diet, fructose is mostly used to replenish the liver glycogen and support energy needs. De novo lipogenesis is minimal because the liver is burning more carbs and not storing as much as fat. And even the ones that they do, lipogenesis is not bad either. Lipogenesis, so ATP can be created, like ADP to ATP happens with two different macros. Fat can make ADP into ATP, and carbs. I should have said carbs first, but you get the point. So, insulin sensitivity tends to stay high, and fructose is less harmful even beneficial in this context. Energy turnover is faster. The ATP drain leads to a higher metabolic activity without the fat buildup. And then there's a little chart here and a summary. So, again, I'm not going to say disingenuous. I'm sure he is being as honest as he can be, but it's just not. It's not facts all the way. So, hope you enjoyed this one. I'm out. I'm Jimmy. We're on the road to 195. If you believe that I'm going to be 195 in a year, drop 195 in the comments. and stick with me through these rough videos until I get comfortable, and we'll just keep rocking. Peace.